Good morning, George. It's Wednesday morning for a change, and we have one of our favorite repeat guests on the show today.
Yeah, we have Chip Hart from PCC, Physicians Computer Company, and he's going to have a very interesting topic of discussion. The topic is called, Is a Pediatric Private Practice Still Worth Buying? Thank you, Chip, for coming and joining us.
Thanks for having me back. You know that we always have interesting discussions, if nothing else.
Yeah, and very long.
Glad to be yeah, glad to be here.
Hey, Chip, can you change the name to the company to Pediatric Computer Company so I stop putting it wrong everywhere?
I think it used to be called that, right, Chip?
No, Herb, I want you to sit down when I tell you this. You ready? You
Okay.
want to know what the original name of our company was?
No.
The People's Computer
Oh, yes, I
Company.
remember.
Because we were incorporated. All right, just
Oh, dang it.
don't cry, but we were incorporated the same week basically that Bernie Sanders won his first mayoral campaign here. And we needed a fast name. And all the joking aside or whatever, that was actually very intentional because part of the goal at the time was to put humanity back into software. Keep in mind, this is the 80s. So it's
Yeah.
not like today where it's really inhumane. It was just, but no. So our corporate filings, I think, are as People's Computer Company, DBA Physicians Computer Company.
Yeah, I remember that. But how
Yep.
are things in Vermont?
Vermont's good. I just got back from PMI, which was, I don't know how. Seriously, the energy was great. You guys know what it's like. You're up at dawn and you're out till 2 and you're talking the whole time and engaging. And I had some
Yeah.
great conversations. Some really, I'll tell you, there are a couple really big highlights of the event. But I think a very subtle highlight of the event was the half day pre-con relating to DPC, direct care, concierge, and
Mm.
people were talking about that the whole time. I don't know if you've got people on your schedule to talk about that topic, but you might want to bring some people in.
Yeah. All right.
Drew is great. I think Drew's been on the show a couple of
Yep.
times.
Yeah. He was one of the speakers. Kelly Parker Mello, Suzanne Madden. I can't remember who else. I'm sorry, but that was a big conversation for folks.
George is not a fan of DPC. He doesn't think it works.
I have a lot to say about that, but that's not our topic today.
Now we'll do that another time.
Yeah.
So what's going on in the pediatric private practice world? Anything cool or distressing?
I don't want to cost you future guests or sponsors, but you two know this. The boogeyman in this business right now is private equity,
Right.
and they are causing trouble. And I am not going to go into details because of what I believe will be soon pending lawsuits, not by us, but just by other people. Some of the stuff is starting to unravel. Now, I'm not so naive to think that it's all going to unravel and things are going to go back to the way they were. It's not. It's just that the PE people have run out of places to spend their money, so they've shown up where we are. I will say this: one of the vendors at PMI, because the PE guys were all over PMI. One of the vendors was the first one I ever heard to sit straight up, tell the truth at the beginning. I had two clients or two people I know. One was a client, one wasn't. Tell me they went to talk to the guy at the booth, and he said, "Our goal is to buy and network as many pediatric practices as possible, and then in 7 years sell them to an insurance company." It's like,
Wow.
oh, you said the quiet part out loud. You're not supposed to tell people that. And so I like it, you know, in my semi-libertarian worldview, you know what? At least he's honest. He's telling you what the plan is. And if you don't have a succession plan, your only options are to close the practice or sell to the hospital who you know is going to suck. Take the money from these guys. At least like it's the thing that I don't one of the things I don't like about PE is just that it's painting a picture of nirvana over here when that's really not that's not their goal. Their goal is private equity firms. Their goal is not to help children. Their goal is not to take care of kids. Their goal is to make money. And
So,
I have a problem with that.
so,
Great, but
so,
just be
so
honest
Chip,
about it. Yeah, sure.
so what is a problem with private equity? I know, first of all, they're focused only on making money.
Hmm.
But there's nothing wrong with making money, no margins, no mission. But when your only
Except,
purpose is to make
except,
money
you know,
and everything else is subservient to that, in healthcare, that is not a good solution for society.
look, much smarter people than the three of us have had long debates about this, about the presence corporatization of many different industries. What we're talking about now, we're asking the question, what's wrong with private equity? Ask the airlines. 20 years ago. Ask who else has PE got into? All these manufacturing sectors that
Uh,
the three of us don't know anything about. Now they're here.
Your local dry cleaners.
Yeah.
That's a model they're using with pediatric practices. It's called the aggregator model.
Yeah.
So you buy all the little dry cleaners around the town, and then you get economies of scale
But
because
you don't.
you're buying equipment and
Maybe for dry cleaners, but when it comes to
yeah,
buying medical practices, you don't get economies of scale. I don't believe that for a second. You
and
can't
then
hire cheaper. You can't get the doctors cheaper. Oh, I'm sorry. You fire the doctors and bring in the mid-level. So maybe that's
Right.
cheaper. But
Yeah.
everyone can get the same GPO. You're all buying vaccines from the same people at the same price. And I want to be clear. I'm not aware yet. I welcome correction. Someone could correct me publicly. Okay. I'm not aware yet of a single PE-backed acquisition where the practice actually performed better financially. Because over and over again, these guys come in, they say, we're the smartest people in the room. We know how to run your business. And they don't know how to do billing. They don't know how to do pediatric billing. They don't know how. And here's why. This is why, Herb. You and I have talked about stuff like this before. So I'm going to go to the punchline. This is why this is why I think the role of PE in medicine has to be or should be very limited and carefully considered. What you two sell as physicians, what your product is relationships.
Correct.
And relationships don't scale. You can't come in and turn George Rogo into a 1,500 patient doctor panel into a 3,000 patient panel because you somehow made him a better doctor, because it's still 10 or 15 minutes with that mom. That is what you do.
so I'm gonna push back because if I
Please.
think of someone in the relationship business, I think of Chip Hart. And you have scaled a business and you have a ton of independent pediatric practices using your product. And you're all Chip Hart is all relationship based.
Correct.
And number two, numbers. Number three, baseball. Number four, use Mercedes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Herb, you and I are on the same page there, but here's the thing. I could not bring PE into what we do. All right. Because I can't scale what I do. I am like every day at the limit of what we'll to accomplish. And as successful as we are, PCC is the smallest EHR vendor in our space by like 100 miles, except for the new guys like Devil. OP is 4 times bigger than we are.
Right.
eClinical Works is probably 100 times bigger than we are. And what PCC is, seriously, I hadn't thought about this till you said it. We are I think we're the last independent EHR vendor. There might be others. And we're the equivalent of George's practice.
Yep.
And we like it this way. I like what I do, and I would not want to water down my relationships in order to increase the volume of my relationships.
Right.
That makes sense.
Correct.
Yes.
I also like my relationships with the patient.
Yep.
And I think I think it's all about workflows and ease of use and getting people working and seeing patients, get them in, get them out, make people happy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you guys, and Herb, you don't know this, but I think I remember way back in the days before Chip Hart, PCC was sold to some private equity, right? They took it and then they destroyed it.
Well,
And then you guys had to
actually,
take it back.
that's a great story. So it wasn't private equity. But it was, let's call it something equivalent. It was some local investors. It was ostensibly a local doctor who was friends with us. And what they saw was, right, this is 1991, right when I started. And what they said is, look at this cool company. It has a cool culture. It seems like they have a niche market. Let's grow them and expand them. So they bought into the company. I don't know the details, but I have a sense of it. They bought into the company, brought in all these salespeople. We focused on sales, and it didn't work that way. After about a year, they came back and they said, all right, we burned through all the cash. We're just going to close the company down. And John and Jay, the guys who founded the company, were like, and no one ever does this, okay? They said, instead of closing the company, Back then we had like 35, 40 clients. Something like that. They said, instead of closing the company and making all these people unhappy, can we just buy it back from you over time? And because we think we know how to do this. And to his credit, the guy who was, let's say the lead investor, he was like, sure, it's better. He doesn't get the big tax loss, which is probably what he wanted, but he knew it was the right thing to do. And we went from 35, 40 employees overnight to 9. And then we rebuilt. I came in, I remember the day. This is
Yeah.
how dumb I am. I was like 22, 23,
Yeah.
22. And I came in, I walked in, I looked around. I was like, where is everyone? And John came out of his office, like all stressed out. He's, hey, we had to lay everyone off. Can you answer the phones? I was like, sure. A normal person would have worked on his resume that day. It didn't even dawn on me. I was like, I've got work to do. And then you wake up 35 years later. Oh, whoops.
What did you see in that conversation with John as a young kid? You saw
I just
potential.
I just saw potential, and I also saw dedication.
Right.
Like we had, and this is something that pediatricians, doctors really understand. You are you pathologically avoid abandoning patient. Like it is the worst feeling in the world.
Right.
They depend on you and you get it. And so John had the same thing. I've got these 40 clients who are happy and we're running their practice well and things are going well for them. And if I sink the ship, it's going to make them miserable. So he felt that obligation and I did too. Honestly, I never even thought about applying somewhere else. I don't know why.
Well,
I'm
you
not
had a
very
vision
smart.
because you had a
No,
He
vision.
had no
I
vision. He's
think.
22
you're giving
years
me too
old.
much
Yeah.
credit. You're giving me
Yeah.
too much credit.
20-year-old. He's a hardworking individual and a cheerful individual. And he said, I can answer the phones. I can step up. It will pay dividends in the long run if we all pull in the same direction.
Well, he didn't think how much you're going to pay me. Are you going to pay me more because I'm answering the phones?
No, that's
That definitely did not occur to me.
Yeah.
That definitely did not occur to me.
today's conversation. Back then, we stepped up, we did the work that needed
Yep.
to be done, and we hope that would be rewarded through the longevity of our relationships.
Yep.
It's not. So number 3 on private equity is, I do think that the bigger the group, there are some cost savings. There are additional costs because of all the regulation and human resources and vice president of this and vice president of that. But then once they buy your local dry cleaners, then there's no competition. So then the shirt that was being done by $1.50 now costs $3.50. And there's no lot. No, you can't go anywhere else in town.
Yep.
They're all $3.50. And that's what's happening in medicine, right? Private equity groups come in, they buy as many clinicians as they can, and then they say, we want 250% of Medicare for access to our network. And if you don't want to pay it, you won't have a product in this neighborhood.
I think that's actually just the short-term impact because
Right.
what you're describing is what the hospital's been doing for 20 years.
Yep.
It's all about territorial leverage. However, most of the PE firms, the ones that I know, the ones that I deal with, they haven't really leveraged great contracts yet.
Nope.
What they're doing is they're trying to gather as many as possible. You borrow all that you can against it. So you pull all the cash out of the business. You strip away costs for a year. So your EBITDA looks really high. Your profit looks really high. You basically, hit the nitro on the engine. So the engine's burning over hot. And then you turn around and flip it to the next guy. And so that is where they make their money. So at the best, like I'm sure some PE people will listen to this and say, oh, he's a fool. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But I've seen more pediatric P&Ls than just about anybody, right? I've been doing this for a long time and I get to look behind people's curtains. A typical pediatric practice, give or take, has a 10% margin. All right. That's what the owners get for running the business. All right. You got to be careful because some people will be like, that math doesn't work for me. There's the payment, the money you get for seeing patients. George sees patients. He's employed by his own business. He's self-employed. So he gets paid for being a doctor. And after he pays himself as a doctor and all his other clinicians and all his staff and his rent and his EHR and his vaccines, the money that gets left over, It's in the neighborhood of 10%. I know practices are at 0. I know practices are at 20, but it's in the neighborhood of 10%. It's a very healthy business. It's a 10% margin year in, year out that's a great investment. But that's not the kind of investment that PE firms make. They make their money by taking a bunch of those and selling them at 5 or 10 times what they purchased them for. That's their goal anyway. And that's what they're looking for. And no one's going to get 5 or 10 times what they bought it for. But if they get twice what they got them for, then their investors are happy. That's the mission.
And then not only that, but they load the companies with debt.
Yep.
And they use that debt to pay themselves back
Yep.
the initial investment.
Yep.
So they're always whole. And then if that wasn't bad enough, if you own any real estate associated with the practices of nursing homes, they sell it to another private equity and then they rent.
You guys need to do a whole other episode or two about medicine and real estate, because I can't even start talking about that, because we won't even get to the question of, is it worth it to buy a practice? Because take a look at take a look at some people in our industry.
I know.
All right, people near George, for whom the practice of pediatrics is really about expanding real estate holdings.
Igor talked about that. He said, it's like a McDonald's franchise. I don't care if
Yes.
you make money off of the McDonald's or not. I just have to pay the mortgage on the building.
Yep.
And now I've got 10 buildings in great locations and they're paid for themselves. And that's my retirement plan.
I read an entire really fascinating article from a real estate developer. He talked about a dentist he works with. And what the dentist does is he buys a building cheap, something that needs rehab. He fixes it up, puts his dental practice in there, expands his dental practice in there, gets it up and running. He signs a 5 or 10-year lease with himself in his own building, then sells the practice to the dentist he propped up. And the value of his building just went through the roof, because commercial real estate sucks, because he's got a 5 or 10-year lease to a medical practice. And then he sells the building and goes and does another one. He makes a couple million a year doing that. But this isn't what we're here to talk about.
No, we're
Let's
not
talk
talking about this.
Yeah,
Finish one thing before.
yeah,
The
please.
private equity people will tell you that this is their business model and they make no excuses. I go talk to Chip, I go talk to George, I go talk to Nick Rogel, Jim Riley, and I raise $50 million.
Yep.
And then it's a limited partnership. I manage it, but you all are partners.
Mhm.
And it has a time limit, 5 years usually. In 5 years, I got to return the money that the partners gave me to fund the entity
Mhm.
and move on. And I think what most people don't understand is that 5 years is nothing, and it is a hard deadline.
Yeah. Yeah.
In 5 years, I have to liquidate this asset, sell it to someone else, find another group of investors that's willing to pay for it. But the money has to go back to the partners that invested it.
If it's just about money, just go to the bank and borrow it and develop your own practice and make it bigger.
Uh,
I don't get it.
Generally speaking, George, that's the camp I'm in. And there is one of these firms, I don't even know I guess I'd still call it PE. One of the PE firms, who have been calling people I know, they're actually bank funded in that way. They don't have big capital backers. They've just got their local bank. There are challenges to that as well. I am a very small thinker, and I work with people. I'm related to investment bankers. My brother's a big investment banker, and the way that his brain works and people he works with works, they're always thinking about bigger, better, expanding. And I'm always worried about the fundamentals. How did you do in that exam room? How did that mom walk out of your office feeling? That's the thing that I think about. And it's just because of the way I'm wired. I'm not nice. I'm not special. I'm not cheesy. Like, I miss opportunities all the time because I'm like, is this going to screw up the people who actually have to do the work?
Right.
And I think most pediatricians think in a similar fashion.
Right.
Yeah. But if you're going to take a 5-year investment,
Yep.
and pediatrics is a relationship-based business, that is 20 to 30 years,
Yep.
it's not a good match.
Yep.
Right.
One is dating, the other one wants to be married and see their grandchildren in their retirement home.
Yep.
That doesn't work.
Yeah, I guess private equity is like today's young adults hookups.
Yeah. Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it is.
Actually, someone,
It's a
it-
short-term relationship.
and someone at PCC, we had 20 people at PMI because we send as much staff as we can so they can learn and interact and everything. And they all send logs. They all send notes back to the office. It's part of our culture. You tell everyone what you saw, what you did. And one of the people made that exact analogy. They said, these PE people are like Tinder.
Yeah,
And occasionally you end up with an STD.
of course. Yeah. But all these things, mergers, hospital systems buying, I've seen
That's
it
not why you went to
before.
med school.
I've seen
That's
that
not-
before. And what happens? Just like with PCC, somebody took it over, they mismanaged it, destroyed it, and then they give it back to the docs. Here, take it.
Yeah. Oh, if you're lucky, that's what happens.
I've seen the hospitals give it back.
Oh yeah, but it's also there are places where the hospitals just close.
Yeah.
And now this is happening in so many places. You guys don't see it because you're in particularly urban areas. But in the rest of the country, you now have places where it's still many hours to the closest children's hospital and
Right.
sometimes hours to the closest hospital. And too many places where there isn't even a pediatrician. And that's horrible.
Well,
Let's move on. Let's stop
Yeah,
private
yeah.
equity. We're getting off the
to
track.
that
Yeah.
point, it used to be rural communities that suffer from lack of access
Yeah.
and the urban poor. Now it's everybody.
Yeah.
So just in the Washington, D.C. metro area, Prince George's County, which is in the Maryland side, has an average or median income per family 90,000. 30% of
Yeah.
people are college educated. 8 out of 10 women who are pregnant leave the county to deliver.
Yeah.
And their mortality rate for children and mothers is something like 10 times the national average.
Yep.
They had to
But
find that they've
You
had
and
to,
I know this. You and I know this from Scott Krugman. Scott Krugman's stories about them eliminating children's beds
in Baltimore.
in
in
Baltimore
Baltimore.
is crazy.
Yeah.
Well, they
So-
just closed I've been going to this one hospital for my entire career. They just closed them. They have a beautiful maternity ward, but they're just closing it. They had an NICU maternity ward, surgeries, and they're just closing it because they don't have enough gynecologists. And I went to the CEO and said, why don't you just find a laborist to help the few gynecologists that are left? I told them rocket science. Oh, we can't do that. I think they wanted the space for more.
But George, no think that's exactly what they wanted. This is about the money. So
Yeah.
hospitals are the devil, guys.
Yeah.
And in DC, it's the same thing. Whole side of DC has no maternity care. And people scratch their heads and say, how can that be? And I have an answer for you. It's called Medicaid.
Yes.
When 50% of the kids are on Medicaid and 40% of pregnant moms are on Medicaid, and they pay $5,000 per delivery, no hospital can provide the care with that at that price range. And you're not going to attract pediatricians or obstetricians to come work for $45 a visit in a neighborhood that's not exactly safe, and it's an hour away from your nice neighborhood where you're living because you got a little bit of money and you don't want to be in the middle of the bad neighborhood.
Right.
And you can build it, but the reality of it is you're always going to have a recruiting problem because you have such a huge burden of Medicaid that you can't make practices viable.
Right.
And that's something you can say that hospitals are evil, yes, but who funds Medicaid? They're just as evil.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say,
changing. Things
Yeah,
are changing in the Medicaid world. I think
Yeah.
they're trying to get better, at least in New York.
I'm also going to say that one of the things, Herb, just using your broad example, I think one of the fundamental issues is that it's not simply about absolute funding. Can a hospital survive getting paid $2,500 for a birth? It's that at $2,500 or $5,000, that procedure is generates relatively less money than all of these other adult procedures.
Correct.
So the fact of the matter is, can a hospital survive at $2,500 a visit? Yeah, I bet it can. And guess what happens? They eliminate all kinds of like middle management things and all this stuff, all this nonsense to manage community health and all. Of course, a hospital can do this but it just means you have to scale it back down instead of saying how, are we gonna be in 50 locations in our town? Did we build all this real estate because we were trying to push the other hospital out?
Wow.
Every human organization, hospitals, the Boy Scouts, churches, universities, every single government party, they all, once they get to a point where their mission is no longer important, it's the survival of the entity itself. And we've all heard plenty of times, if it's good for the hospital, it's good for the community. We got to do this because if it harms the hospital, our community is harmed. And that is not logical. There's a point at which the entity itself is not looking out for the people it serves. It looks out for itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think these entities, they claim that they save money on healthcare. I think it's all a farce. Look at private equity went into airlines, right?
Yeah.
Remember, you used to go down to Florida for $200 on time. Now you
Yeah.
can't go to Florida but for $600, and you're probably late most of the time. You can't find flights. It's like crazy. Look what private equity did to the airlines.
Yeah. We could talk about that for hours. So, all right. Now, look,
Yeah.
So,
ask me the
No.
question I'm here to answer.
Listen, the question is, this is getting, you guys are very depressing. If I was a young physician, I'd want to go and do something else, not medicine. And I feel bad for the kids that I teach in the
Yeah.
medical school. Now, the question is, if you're a pediatric residency graduate coming out now, how do you decide? Do you go into employment? Do you join an independent practice that's a little bit bigger? Or do you just go and put up a shingle and say the doctor is open?
I have so much to say about this. I'll be succinct.
Go ahead, quick.
All right. And I get PCC, we get so many of these practices. I teach classes to residency programs. I hear about this all the time. This is what I'll tell you. First of all, the hospitals do almost zero preparation. Most of them do zero preparation for graduating physicians, residency
Right.
programs. They don't teach them about business. In fact, they routinely tell them that you can't go into independent practice. I have had residency programs say, hey, your talk is great, but can you take out the slide about opening a practice? Literally, I've had people say that. My broad advice is most physicians coming out of residency are not educated enough about running a business to successfully open a business. It's like our company has worked with dozens of practices over the last few years who really struggle because they've come out of residency fresh new and they open a practice and they don't have enough capital, enough support, a business plan. They just envision being a small town doctor and what color the waiting room looks like, and they haven't actually done the business. However, I have worked with an increasing number of physicians who come out of residency. They all have debt. Everyone owes money when they come out of residency, and they go and work for someone else for 2, 3, 4, 5 years to understand how a practice flows, to understand who do I need to hire and for what positions and where those conversations or, what it can look like. And they pay down their debt, they build up a little capital, and then they go open a practice. And to me, that model generally makes sense. Like I'm happy with that. And I used to recommend for my clients who are looking for doctors, I used to recommend, go grab them fresh out of residency. You still can, you should. But look at your local big employers and try to hire the ones that have been in the business for 2, 3, 4 years. Bring them into independent practice. I see that a lot. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Well,
because nobody's going to lend you the money to start a practice when you have no equity. So only if your dad is or mom is a orthopedic surgeon or a dermatologist or radiologist that can buy you a new practice and set you off in the good path.
I think it can still happen.
oh,
It's just-
stop being a negative Nancy Herb.
That's true.
You go to
Yeah.
the bank, your MD is worth something. Go to the
Your
bank.
You've never borrowed from the bank for a startup business. I
You
have.
can.
Well,
You
you
can.
Yeah. They don't
see.
like to borrow against assets. That's why they're a bank.
They're borrowing against your MD because they know you
not
probably.
borrowing-
I will say the truth is somewhere in between, because this is what you just described, Herb, is exactly what Katrina Skinner did. All right. She did not have this huge capital reserve, or she comes from a farming family, all right, a fishing family. She went out, borrowed money, built a building, started a practice 3 weeks out of residency. However, do I think everyone can do that? Is that sort of access to capital available to everyone, or even a majority of people? Absolutely not. It requires a certain amount of planning, organization, and dedication that most people don't have. It also requires, I don't think, for where you are, I agree with you. I don't think you can do it where you are.
It's
Can you
all
do it? Yep.
SBA loans, and they
Yep.
want a building to tag how they do the SBA loans in the banks is if you get a building, then they put all the loan into the building, and that's what they attach. That's the asset.
Right.
But if you're in a place that is that where the competition and the density of pediatricians isn't so thick, a smart local bank, as George is saying, can get its money back. And so
Right.
it's all very regional. But the bottom line is you can't depend on it. You
Right.
have to have you have to have a better plan than just, oh, I'll waltz out there and make it happen. And I do meet a lot of practices who do that. And they are a heavy burden for those of us who support them.
You go to, it's just like opening an ice cream shop. You borrow some
Yep.
money, you have some savings, you go work at somewhere else a little bit, then you work over here and you develop your practice. That's if you
Yep.
come out of residency, which is the hard way. But what about ways like the way I did it, Chip? I joined a bigger group. I helped to develop them. There was a bunch of old guys that really they saw me and they said, "Go find a computer because we need computers. You're a young guy, you figure it out."
Yep. Yep.
And then you learn from them, CPT
Yep.
coding and all this other stuff,
You
management.
get your feet under you,
Yeah,
you get some confidence, and then
yeah.
you go do it.
Then you start. And I learned in the practice, if you learn a computer and you have the information technology and you control that, you can control a practice. Yep.
I'm with you.
Yeah. So the big question is, do you think it's worth these days to buy a practice?
All right. You prepared me for this meeting today. You said we're
Yeah.
going to ask.
Actually, you know what? Before we do that,
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
you once told me, is having an MD a guarantee to success? Do you remember what you told me? I had asked you, I used to think that you should succeed because you have an MD.
No, it just means you have to hustle hard like everyone else. It just
You
means
said
you
to
get.
me, and you're going to be amazed that I remember this. You said a lot of doctors feel that an MD is a guarantee to success, and it is not. All it means is it gives you a little bit of a head start in life. Where your friends are on this line, you got a couple of 100 feet ahead of them. And if
Mhm.
you're smart enough to go faster, you'll succeed. If you start on the same line, then they'll catch up to you and beat you.
Yeah.
I
Well, George,
still feel that way.
George, I think that's a little bit of an unfair question. That's like saying, is it worth getting married? But all depends on who your wife is, right? So if you're going to join a practice and try to be there for 30 years, it depends on the quality of the practice and the culture of the partners that you joined.
Yeah, first. And it also depends on the quality of you.
Of course.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So if you're, it's all me, it's all about me. I got the MD, I got this, I'm smarter than you.
There's
Work.
there's a little bit of that in and out of the world. So the
Yeah.
first thing I'll tell you is this: is it
Yeah.
worth it to buy a practice? And my first answer is going to be, it's a math problem, and you got to reduce it to a math problem. The second part of that, my answer is, it so totally depends. It's totally contextual. What are you buying? How much? What's your existing condition? And before we started recording, I think it was before we started recording, you had brought up an example of, there's a local practice to you, George, that's closing, the doctor's retiring, and another one of the practices is buying it. And the example, as you described it, makes perfect sense to me. All right. There are other times, of course, when it doesn't make sense, because what you're getting is maybe not a practice you want to be associated with. The practice might have what I call toxic assets, which is usually 25 years worth of charts that could send you to jail. And sometimes, oh my gosh, I know some horrible stories about people who purchased practices who shouldn't have, because they paid 2, 5, 10 times more than they should have, number one. And number two, if they hadn't paid anything, they were going to get all the patients anyway.
So,
All right.
so
But it
that's the
depends. It
argument.
depends.
That's the argument that a lot of physicians will say. Herb, you're retiring. You don't have a younger associate who's going to take over the practice. You're next door to me. where do you think those patients are going to go? Why would I give you a dime?
Right. That is the case in some instances, but you can also, what I would say is, if you have waited until, the last 6 months of your career to figure out how to transition and have a succession plan, you've already failed. You should be looking out and saying, okay, I've got maybe 3 years left of, of practice. That's when you should be approaching other practices and say, I'd like you to take over my practice, because it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm going to get a check for $1 million.
It's not going
Okay.
to be that high.
If it's one of the PE firms. Okay. But if you're going to get a check, but to be clear though, George, a lot of people think that's what they're going to get. You're not going to get that. You're not going to get that when you have 6 months left. What you can do though, is you can approach some other pediatricians who you like, and they can purchase the practice over time, or they can purchase the practice out of the earnings of your practice. It means they can expand their practice without having to hire up because you already have staff, without having to find clinicians because they already have you. If you do it right, like adults, and you can actually, everyone benefits, including and especially the patients. But
Right.
if you've had your head down forever and you don't have a plan for what happens when you leave, only bad things happen.
So what's that time frame, Chip? What do you think? You should start doing this 5 or 3 years before you really are ready to leave, because that's the other problem.
Right. I,
Some people say, I'm ready to leave, and they linger on and they don't let me run the practice how I want
oh
to.
yeah, there's a very simple solution to that. Okay. I'll get back to that. Here's my message to every one of your listeners right now. Okay. If you don't have a plan today, I don't care if it's 3, 5, or 25 years in the future for what would happen if you're gone. If you don't have a succession plan, you need to create one today. You have thousands of patients who depend on you. And you need to have a sense of who's going to take over for you starting now. So there is no magic line. I'm going to say, Herb, you need to always know who is going to run your practice. All right. And
Agree.
who is going to take care of your kids. That's number one. Number two, I'm very familiar with the problem that you're talking about, Herb, in terms of like people who aren't willing to leave. There's a very simple solution to this. It's so simple and so stupid. People forget to do it all the time. You just get it in writing. Like it's so stupid, but I've worked with so many practices. Say, he just said he'll practice for another 6 months. It's 2 years later. I'm like, what happened? He was like, they didn't want to leave. I said that when he said he wants to leave in 6 months, you sign an agreement. And that agreement, here's the best part about that agreement. Okay. When you sign an agreement that says you are no longer going to own this business in 6 months, or I'm taking over for these things. If 6 months passes and both parties are like, you know what, we can go another 6 months like this, you can just tear up the agreement and sign another one. Right?
Right.
Like it's not the only permanent answer. You're not deciding on the rest of your lives. You're just agreeing that if unless you both agree, this is what's going to, or agree to do otherwise, this is what's going to happen. And just get it in writing. It solves all the problems. I have a slide in one of my slide decks it's one of the decks about working with people. And it's a picture from The Godfather. And it just says the very famous quote, it's not personal, it's just business.
Business. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I actually have found over the years that when you approach a business relationship as a business and keep the friendship separate, it's much more effective. Because I can talk to you two and say, yes, no, I don't like this, in terms of on a business level. You guys want to do this? We can have that conversation. And then when that conversation's over, we can go back to saying, hey, how are you? What's going on? What do you think about this? You have to keep those things separate. When you get your feelings in the way of your business, bad things happen.
Yeah.
And it's hard because pediatricians are almost all empaths. Like it's like part of your nature and your
Yeah.
business. You feel for other people and you're not good at the business.
In my world, we already took over 2 practices over the span of my
Yep.
career.
Yep.
First one, we went to take it over. We had PCC at that time, just PCC, no EHRs, with just the
Yep.
paper world. So it was much easier. So we brought over a whole lot of
Yep.
technology.
I remember that.
We had a younger physician that could keep the name going, and we kept the older guy but he had a stroke and he just stayed in, he really didn't do much. But the second round with Dr. Raymond's practice, that one was great because the next question, community engagements and relationships. This physician was so well known
Yep.
everywhere. And all I needed from him was to be happy and go around, hey, we're working with RBK now. These are good people.
Yep.
Carry on,
Yep.
right? So we kept him happy. We got him, he couldn't work with the EHRs. So we got him a scribe.
Yep.
We paid him well, and he would come to work. He would bang out patients. He was happy. He's still on our website. He hasn't been working since before COVID, but he's
Yep.
still part of the team because I think he needs in his head to belong.
Right.
But he was loyal to us. We paid him
Yep.
well, and we exchanged some money, and it was great. But you
Yep.
can't get rid of him right away. And then
No,
he also served as a role as a mentor because he was one of those old school gentleman doctors. He taught the younger doctors how to be a doctor. He taught me how to be a doctor.
yep.
So mentorship is important also, I think.
I'm have I don't want to say broker, that's a little bit too strong, but I have many times worked with practices to say, okay, you're buying out a partner or you're buying out a practice because they're very similar, whether it's a separate practice, you have a partner in your existing group. I say, you know what? You know how your partnership agreement says you're going to pay them $500,000 because that does happen. Okay. Because you got a partnership agreement that's not well worded. So you got to pay this guy $500,000. You don't have $500,000 cash. So why not sit down and ask this doctor, like, how do you want to work? And the doctor at this point says, I don't want to do call anymore. Okay.
Okay.
I only want to work 2 days a week because I have some families. I want to, okay, we're gonna book you for 2 days a week. We are going to pay you at a premium that no one else in town has ever seen. We're going to overpay you, but you're going to mentor people. You're going to help. We're going to work with your families. You're not going to have to take call. We're going to help you land your plane, and you can actually have a contract, an employment contract with that physician that goes as long as it's mutually beneficial. That is actually how you buy him out of his. Just have a conversation. Just talk.
What's wrong with that?
Nothing. No, people take positions and are afraid to share their positions with others and actually say, this is what I want. And that's a shame.
Yeah.
People in negotiations get
Emotional.
emotional and wedded to a tree.
Yep.
This is my tree. I don't want this tree touched, and they don't
Yeah.
see the forest. There's a fire right outside the forest. If you don't fix it, then that tree's gone, and every tree around it is gone.
Yeah.
But that's just human nature. The flip side of doing what you did, George, is that there are some practices, pediatric practices. Not everybody in pediatrics is an empath that churn residents. Every
Yes, I
2
think that.
years,
Yep.
they fire them. They pay them very little, and then they fire them. And then there's other practices where there's one solo guy that's king and pays everybody very little and tries to play that game for as long as he or she can. And the king is making tons of money and the peons are barely me. So that was my point to RBK. It's not just your personality, but it's just that the founding partners of RBK did not believe in being dishonest with new doctors
Mhm.
because that does exist out there.
It does. There are thousands and thousands of pediatricians. So if 1/10 of 1% turn out to be sociopaths, you're gonna get some of that behavior. But by and large, I got really lucky when I fell into this career because I work with people who are generally almost exclusively focused on other people. You as a group, routinely, you do what's good for the kids first. And that makes it really easy for me to do my job because I don't second guess my clients in terms of what they're trying to do. Are they trying to zap me? We all know that if I were working for hospitals or pick another profession, I hate to say this, my wife will kill me, but attorneys,
Hmm.
I'd always have to be rechecking the contract. Like, did I just sign something that means I'm now on the hook for the rest of my life? With pediatricians, you don't. You there's a consensus about this is the right way to behave, and this is the right way to transact your business. We're all in it to take care of the kids. So once you get that in your head, the rest is easy.
Now, before we spoke, and I've heard this many times, when you're buying a practice, you're not buying it used to be that you would buy the medical charts and it'll be a factor of times how many charts, and that's your number.
Yep.
I've heard that there's no value in charts or patient rosters or so forth because they belong to the insurance companies. I think that's wrong, because we've done this where you're buying the practice, the guy's a consultant and he's working for you. You write to the insurance company, this doctor is now employed under this tax ID number, working at this address under us. All of those patients now flip over to the new entity. So you just got all the patients. So
Yep.
it does have a value, I think.
But I think, George, to Chip's point of is these are all math problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of math problems in this whole thing.
Yeah,
Right.
there's a lot. Who
Yeah.
knew?
So
When you were in school and your teacher said you're gonna use this math when you get older. You're like, "No, I'm not." "Yeah, you
so
are."
when I started, I did residence in '89, and when I started practice in '92, practice valuation was a dollar amount per chart the practice had. The building, because almost everybody owned their suite, the cost of the depreciated equipment in the office, and a factor of the account receivables, plus a goodwill for the good reputation of the practice. And that's how you paid for a practice back then.
Yep.
Today, the math number, and Chip knows it much better than I do, and so does Polly, none of that is taken into account. What is taken into account is what is your margin, and in how many years do I expect to have that money returned to me? That's what the factor is. If your margin is 10% on a $10 million practice, that's a million. And as an investor, am I willing to put in 3 million? That means in 3 years, the money's going to come back to me, or 5 years. So that's a factor, the PE. And so that's how they value the practices now. So whether you have the charts or not, they're not putting that in the math equation. It's not right or wrong. It's just what math you're using.
Uh,
But they're looking at your margins, and then they're saying your margin's a million. I'm willing to pay 3 million because in 3 years I get that money back. Or I'm willing to pay 7 million because I'm going to be on this for 7 years,
Right.
and I'm okay with that risk.
Yes.
And it's just a math problem.
So I guess
Yeah.
these are strategies that one would use to transition the merger. Know your data, know your expenses, what's going on with the practice. And the one thing that I learned, don't change too many things too quickly,
Yeah.
because I've seen acquisitions of practices where immediately they move the physician's practice to another building.
Yeah.
Because they want to disconnect the physician from the building to ultimately get rid of the physician.
Yep.
I don't know, just continue business as usual, at least for 6 months. And
It
don't make it so
Yeah.
in your face that
No,
something happened.
you're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
To your point about know your numbers, and Chip, you can tell me because you have more experience than I do, of course. But the number one thing that physician practices do wrong is their revenue cycle management.
I have to think about it, but certainly it's definitely among the top. Is it the worst thing? It might be. It might be. I hadn't thought of that. You're asking me a complicated question. It's not a bad answer to the question. I will
And
say that.
and there's an opportunity if you're an investor and you know what you're doing to come in there and see a practice that has days in AR 60 or 90, and they're heavy on 99212s. But the doctor's loved. He's loved. He's been doing it for 30 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
As an investor, I can say, oh man, I could buy PCC software and I could get that days in AR to 15, and I could change the billing to 99213s and 99214s, which is actually appropriate, and make sure all the ASQ 3s are being done as they're supposed to be done.
Yep.
I can get that revenue for this practice that's 600,000 to 1 million, and I pocket the difference.
I
That's
mean,
another way of looking at it.
yeah, but I think only a
Yeah.
physician can look at it that way.
No,
This guy doesn't know.
Chip can do it better than I can because he's
Chip
seen.
is almost, he's been in the business so long that he knows these things, but just the guy off the street that is PE'd for
They
engineering,
don't
whatever, they don't
they
know.
don't know these things. It's almost embarrassing how bad these firms are at running these businesses. I've seen with my own eyes what they do to the RCM model after they buy them. And I'm like, and I've approached some of them. I've even said, hey guys,
I can fix you.
you're never gonna use PCC. Fine. Okay. But I can actually make every one of your practices more money than they make right now.
I am sure. It's very,
And I'm just shrugging, like they don't care. That's not their thing.
not their thing.
They don't yeah. Anyway, people are crazy, as
Yeah.
you
And
guys
I
know.
mean, but I don't think, Herb, is as simple as just numbers. Buying a practice has numbers. Yes, it's number one and very important. There's some psychology to it, and there's some emotion. There's too much emotion sometimes because you remember you're buying it from this physician that did this for 30 years. It's his baby.
Yeah.
all
You
right.
want to make the baby grow.
So of course, but
They
does
don't
it-
see the emotion. They destroy the emotion.
no,
Yes, they do.
no. Listen to any realtor, and your dad was in the real estate business.
Yeah, medicine is not real estate.
It is, George. Well, people don't buy houses; they buy homes.
Right.
That's the emotion. But at the end of the day, I may fall in love with a beautiful condo in Miami Beach, 4 bedrooms, oceanfront, and it's $5.5 million with $2,000 a month HOA. The bank is not going to lend me the money. They don't care about my emotions. So there's two components to any deal.
Right.
The home you fall in love, does it appraise for what the market in that neighborhood is? And can you pay the debt that the bank's going to lend you?
Yeah.
And that is the same in a pediatric practice. There is the emotion of all this work that someone put for throughout their whole career, the love that his patients have for him or her, and there is how much of a margin he's making because he might have just been seeing 10 patients a day for the last 5 years because he's 80 years old. He didn't need the money.
Right. But if you cater to all those three domains, that's your recipe for success, not just money. Do good medicine, the money will follow.
I agree with that. And also we should add, who's buying up all the single family homes around the country?
Develop.
Renting them.
Like
Yeah.
yeah.
It's-
So anyway. All right.
I have
getting
another
back-
question. How important do you think is technology? Should you buy a practice that has great electronic records and billing and all that kind of stuff? Or
No,
should you buy
because
paper charts?
I don't think what matters is that you have your house in order. You need your your
Right.
EHR to fit your workflow and your patient communication needs and your RCM, and you take the other practice and bring it
Correct.
into your fold. You can't trying to buy up is not something I've ever seen that works.
No,
very
it
well.
doesn't work.
Chip,
Yep.
do you have a number off the top of your head of what it costs per clinician to convert a paper chart office in today's environment into a regular office? It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's not that bad actually. And there aren't a lot of paper practices left. There are some, and we love it when we get a paper practice because it gives a practice a chance to reset, clean things up, get things cleaned up and nice and neat. And it's a lot better than making a conversion from another EHR, especially a cloud EHR, because most of the time you're not getting the data, or you're not getting the data in a timely basis. With the paper charts, all the data is right there on the shelf. It might take some time to input some vitals or whatever, but that's better than a vendor saying, yeah, we need $50,000 and we're going to give it to you in all one gross lump sum 6 weeks after you go online. That doesn't work. So in any event, I don't think the cost of doing it is that much. Let's just say you have 10,000 charts. You can pay high school kids to scan everything and put them in buckets. And so you can pay $5,000, $10,000 to scan those charts. And there are companies, I don't know what they charge, $5 a chart, $10 a chart. There are companies who'll just scan everything and sort it for you. We don't recommend that, but that can happen, and it's not that hard. Converting people from other EHRs, especially cloud-based EHRs where the practice is unable to extract their own data, that's the biggest challenge.
And how about the culture? If you have a practice that is still there are 3 clinicians, let's say there's one in their mid-70s and there's 2 in their 50s, and they're
Yep.
still on paper, and the 2 50-year-olds are gonna stay. How hard is it to get someone to change from paper to EHR at this stage of the game? Not 10 years ago when everybody had to go through the pain.
Yep.
What does that say about that practice?
It's it Someone who's still on paper is taking is pretending to take a philosophical stance and really is just fighting change and doesn't want to. Here's the thing, all EHRs suck, all of them. We're selling pain every day. But the advantages of having at least a halfway decent clinical record electronically are enormous. We take them all for granted now. You can read the chart notes. You can access the chart notes from anywhere. You have real clinical decision support in there. I can tell you immunization rates go up when a practice moves from paper to electronic. Okay. And you can tap a button and contact all your patients. Like the benefits are enormous. They also come with great costs, but the benefits are enormous. Someone right now using paper charts just doesn't want to practice medicine, 21st century medicine. And I'm not even saying that judgmentally. It's just someone who is fighting change regardless of the cost. I can
I
say with some sincerity, if you're practicing on paper today, you are unequivocally limiting your clinical impact, period. Someone might say, but oh no, I'm the best clinician. I'm great in the exam room. That might be, but you can't practically generate a list of all the kids who need their HPV shot. Oh, but all of my kids have the HPV shot. Okay, swell. So let's say you got a bad batch and you need to recall them all, or you're doing it for the flu, or you're going to get everyone for their flu, or now HPV has gone from the 12-year-olds to 9-year-olds. How do you do that? I'm just picking one thing. How do you
Right.
do that?
You're right. To me, though, Chip, although I'm fascinated and I'm happy that we agree that EHRs stink,
Yep.
Yeah.
but to me, it's a culture problem. What's our friend in Chicago with Salute Pediatrics? I just blanked out on his name.
Brandon Betancourt.
Right. Medicine, and particularly when you're talking about pediatrics, is a rapidly changing business.
Yep.
In no other reason that then the parents keep getting younger and I keep getting older.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so to be efficient or effective I have to be nimble and willing to change many times over my career because what the parents think of today, the way they talk today, the way they communicate today is nothing at all familiar to what it was when I graduated from residency in 92.
Yep.
And these people that are still in paper charts to me are stubborn, difficult personalities that I just don't have the time or energy to deal with and change them. They're dinosaurs and they should go the way the dinosaurs went.
Yeah. But in a practice like you mentioned, where you have the senior guy that's 70 years old and the junior guys in their 50s or 40s, where do you think the problem is? There's two problems in this question. Who is the problem in that practice?
Both.
Let's
One is
Yep.
unwilling to change, the other
uh
one are not capable of persuading change, making it.
Exactly. That's the
So
answer right
both of
there.
them are.
Yeah.
So now all 3 of them are your problem if you buy that practice.
Right. So you have to get an ally, which is the younger guys, and develop them and make their life better by proving to them that it is better. And then you keep the older guy as the face for a while, and then you set him off to the sunset. I had a partner that refused to get an EHR.
Right.
As long as I'm practicing, we're not going to get an EHR. The guy lived through 2 EHRs in his lifespan. Changes. I persuaded him.
Yep.
All right. Let's go on
Yeah.
to the next question,
Yeah.
Joe.
So now work-life balance. This is the new line that you hear, right?
Yep.
How does that factor into the decision of joining a hospital, joining an existing practice, or owning your own building, own your own shop.
What do you mean?
If you want to open up your own shop, work-life balance doesn't balance because you got to open up, you got to be there. Whereas if you go work for the man, work-life balance is good. I don't want to come to work. Somebody else will come to work.
I'm going to tell you, I don't agree, believe it or not. So two things. Number one, I'd like to know in what other profession work-life balance exists. Like everyone in the United States is crazy. All right. People work two jobs. People always are grinding. And let's be clear, because all right, hopefully no civilians are listening to this show. What other profession calls a 4-day work week full time? Okay. And it's an 8 to 4 with an hour lunch. Sign me up for that job. All right. But on the other hand, you go to work for the man. The man controls your schedule. The man says you got to work 2 Saturdays a month. The man says you got to take call in these times. I do think, I mean, don't get me wrong. When you are the captain of your own ship, you have to grind and hustle, and it does get overwhelming, and it is scary, and it's a lot of work, but at least you're in charge of it. That's the over under. Okay. That's the over under. So that's how I feel about it. If there were one obvious path to great work-life balance, great reward, we would all be doing this. You wouldn't need this podcast. Everyone would be like, oh yeah, you got your job with so it's great. You're all set because now you're happy and you're paid and all you're paid, but it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's called Sweden. Sweden has a great.
Yeah, there you go. But Herb,
You-
you couldn't live there because you got to pay 70% taxes and
I'm not tall enough. I'm not white enough.
they might take you. You gotta contribute to society.
Yes. They give you 3 months off paid maternity leave for the mother, and then
Yep.
3 months paid maternity leave for the dad afterwards.
And who works?
I don't know how if like you've had a couple working for you, they're both pediatricians, and you're a 5-person practice. How do you fill that slot? Who sees the patients?
And what I'm going to tell you is when the entire society has an understanding of that kind of behavior, things work out. Obviously, things work out.
It works out for them. They're phenomenally rich. They, as pacifist as they are, they're one of the world's top arm dealers, and they are. It's so
They make
interesting.
they make a lot of They make a lot of technology. They have an interesting culture. It's not as a lot of people do talk about how great it is, and they have plenty of problems and holes themselves. But
Yeah, like Volvo.
but they, hey, I like the Polestars. But anyway, we're way off topic.
Yeah. So
And
a final
we both,
question.
yeah, final question. Let's hear it.
What advice would you give to graduating physicians or mid-career physicians or anybody that's on the fence whether to join the man at a system or open up his own shingle or buy another practice out in terms of autonomy, burnout,
Yep.
financial, vision?
In pediatrics, you have to say join the woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the man sounds bad.
Yeah, well, 70% of pediatrics.
Stick it to the man.
Yeah,
There's a
stick it
lot
to
of
it.
women-owned pediatric practices.
All right.
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, it's true though.
Go ahead.
It is funny though, because I've been doing this for a long time. The sort of hierarchical drama that I am familiar with, having worked with pediatricians for so long, a lot of that stuff has gone away with the rise of female-run practices. There are a bunch of things that just don't really happen anymore. The practice breakups don't happen the same way. There's just a lot less territorialness. That's a broad brushstroke. It's not universally true, but there used to be, you know what it was? There used to be a sort of competition that was sometimes negative when it was the all male practices. And with the female practices, there's a little bit more camaraderie and teamwork. And in general,
I take it. I play music. You see my guitars in the background. The Beatles, when they were the Beatles, they were great, right? Together.
Yep.
When it was John and Paul and Ringo and George, they were just okay.
Mhm.
So isn't it better to keep the Beatles going?
Yeah,
I
but it's
think
different.
Taylor Swift is on her own. She's doing great.
She has a huge
She is.
team that no one sees.
Yes.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah.
That's true of anybody who's successful. There's a huge team behind them making things happen. You're
Yep.
just the front person.
Yep.
So what the real question though, Chip, um, is independent pediatric practice viable?
A new pediatric practice? Yeah.
No, in
Oh,
general,
any oh,
all of
as
us.
long as people keep having kids, pediatricians will be fine. And for those of you who live in hyper competitive, dense urban areas like you two, yeah, there's going to be a lot of chaos. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot more to the United States than just the New York City metropolitan area and the DC area. Okay.
Right.
You both could. I know that neither of you will or will want to, certainly. And it's unlikely, but you two both could get in a moving van, drive to about 40 of the other states, open up a practice, and be successful very quickly. And there's almost no other profession where that's the case. You can't do that as a lawyer. You can't do that as a professional athlete. There are certain jobs that are always in demand. The world doesn't have enough plumbers and roofers and so on, but that's not work that anyone here is suited to do. And but as generally speaking around the country, pediatricians are in demand. We don't have enough of them now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Do you have any more
Yeah.
questions, sir?
I have a question. The disparity in payment.
Yep.
Are clinically integrated networks a better solution than selling out to private equity? Because there is a huge disparity in payment when you're independent versus you're part of a big PE or a big hospital system.
Yeah, that stuff is just this. The entire a CIN is just another way of saying IPA, which is just another way of saying that the insurance companies, the laws benefit the insurance companies in a way that they benefit no one else. You're not allowed to collectively bargain, and the only way to do it is if you do it through one of these methods: CIN, ACO, IPA. They're all the same thing. People can tell me that they're not, but at the end of the day, they are all the same thing, one way or the other. And it's bad when the ACOs and IPAs and CINs, they start acting like insurance companies themselves. I was talking to a practice yesterday who's in a CIN out in the Midwest, and it originally was largely independent physicians, but so many of the practices in the CIN have sold to the hospitals now running the show. The hospital is telling all of the independent physicians that they have to get on Epic in order to stay in the CIN.
Yep.
And the practice calls me and says, you know what? I would drop this CIN in a second because it's not even paying me much more, except all of the hospital employees would now be out of network. And I don't want to do that to them. So I'm like, how is this legal? The hospital is forcing them onto the EHR, which gives the hospital leverage that once you're on Epic, you're not leaving. You can't, your charts now belong to someone else. Your charts, you don't get them back. You can't go out and restart your practice and have 1,000 of your patients show up unless you're willing to grind for 2 years and get those patient charts back one at a time. Once that hook is in, it's in. And I'm like, this nonsense that has nothing to do with taking care of the kids. Nothing.
So back to he who controls the computer controls.
Yes. Yep. I very much, I see that all the time. So you're
Yeah.
not wrong. So
And I just think that it's just so unfair, the payment disparity and the this whatever. The hospital owned
yep.
pediatrician down the street is making
Yep.
$200 for a 99213.
Yep.
And you can't get an appointment with them because you can't get through their outsourced call center in India or Colombia or Costa Rica, wherever it is.
Yep.
You can't get an appointment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then they're getting paid $200 for a 99213.
And that
Yep.
physician used to be an independent physician, the same person, same building, same
But
infrastructure.
did you guys? They are right now. It's in the Senate where they are working on legislature to totally eliminate all of that facility fee nonsense for
Yes.
primary care, which long overdue. Which is
Well,
long.
we're not talking about facility fee. We're just talking about 99213.
What I mean though is it's one of the pieces of how the hospitals are in with their consolidation jack up the price, and there is zero evidence of improved care.
No,
No.
no. The access decreases simply because they're so big and they try to be quote unquote
Yep.
efficient. which
Yep.
is let people stand on the queue for an hour before someone gets on the phone.
Correct.
And when you have a sick child, that's not efficient. That's a pain where.
Yep.
But there has to be another solution where you don't have to sell your practice. You don't have to use the same tax ID. You don't run afoul of the laws that don't allow us to bargain as all
Yep.
pediatricians, um, to even out the balance out the payment disparity, which is just destroying the community.
Right.
The fact that you can actually negotiate a different fee from an insurance company is somewhat criminal in its own way. That they have the monopoly on knowing what what people are being paid, and you have no control. You don't even know if what you don't even know if you are being paid fairly. I'm not articulating this well, but it's crazy that this is even an issue at all. You know what I mean?
You know what's crazier? You and I have talked about this. Is you have there's only about 5 major healthcare plans left in the U.S.
Yep.
You want one of the major 5 charging companies like PCC or IPK, Igor's practice, $37,000 a year to insure a family of 3.
It's crazy.
They turn around and they pay the independent pediatrician Medicaid
Less than.
rate
Yep.
schedule for office visits and well child, and they pay less than CDC for the vaccines.
Yep.
And then with a smile, they say, you shouldn't be making money in vaccines. Then send them to me.
Right.
Send it to me, buy a refrigerator. You take over doing the temperature control in the refrigerator. You pay me rent for the space the refrigerator uses. If your patients don't want the vaccine and it goes to waste, it's your problem. And it's like, how can you be charging $38,000 for a person's health insurance and then paying the primary care physicians that take care of them the same as Medicaid? Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Dishonest.
Herb, you just opened up a whole new hour-long conversation.
I'm gonna
About
do
medical cartels.
That's a teaser. We'll leave it for another time, but that's a teaser.
What are your thoughts on medical cartels, Chip? That's the next
Well,
topic.
yeah, you know how I feel about it. All right, I need to go,
All right,
and you guys
thank
need to
you.
go. But thank you, I appreciate it. Good
I
luck.
got to go to the office and work today and save the world one kid at a time.
That's how you do it. I appreciate it.
It's good
All
to
right.
Chip. Stay well.
All right. Bye.